DeCartaret College and St. Jago, good afternoon. So glad you came back for this practice round experience. The moot is this House proposes that criminalizing the use of force by civilians, proposes the criminalizing of the use of force by civilians except in self-defense. I'm going to ask the members of each team if they can please turn on their mic and their video so you can introduce yourself by name. Proponent Premier, opponent leader, proponent deputy premier, opponent deputy leader, and the whips.
Your 3 minutes begins now. First speaker, proponent St. Jago, please.
Good day, adjudicators, viewers, proposition, and opposition. Today, this House stands before you in agreement with the motion. This House moves to criminalize all use of force by civilians, except in self-defense. Essential to this debate is understanding the principles involved. Use of force is a legal term that refers to law enforcement officers using physically harmful or life-threatening actions to compel an individual or group of individuals to cease a typically unlawful action. For the opposition to win this match, they must show that there are situations in which the average citizen must use the same level of force as a trained law enforcement officer in situations where they are not required to defend themselves. To be clear, the proposition has no issues with defending one's life, and law is clear on how to determine self-defense. The challenge is the idea that citizens have the right to threaten the safety of someone else for even good reason. This power is a fundamental difference between a citizen and a police officer, and we are adamant that that should remain the case. To criminalize is to make something punishable as a crime. The Collins Dictionary says that if a government criminalizes an action or person, it officially declares that the action or the person's behavior is illegal, and these kinds of offenses are punishable by prison time. The proposition contends that if you or someone you know is truly in a dangerous situation and need to use force, call the trained professionals who are ready and able to help all who are in need. The United Nations Office of Drug and Crime highlights the context and legal framework for the use of force, including how to determine when it is necessary and how to use it legally. Officers in the heat of the moment must exercise high levels of self-control while deciding on necessity for the use of force, proportionality, or boundaries for what kinds of force are legally allowed to be used. That is, it is not merely about responding in kind, but even in very serious situations, the most forceful response may be deemed illegal. And precaution, which requires officers to plan the course of action to be taken to prevent the creation of a situation where force will need to be used. In short, the use of force is an extremely complicated thing. According to the United Nations, domestic violence accounts for the second highest kinds of murder and violent crimes in Jamaica. This tells us that not only a specific set of people in the country are extremely aggressive and physically confrontative, but it is a large section of our population. It is the average citizen. This suggests that an ordinary person's attempt to help out a situation is likely to be a breeding ground for a much more violent and potentially life-threatening scenario than it initially was. Given our propensity to violence and the complicated nature of use of force, it is wholly unsafe for the state to allow normal people the right to use force, even if the motives are pure. Individuals who have not undergone the same level of training as law enforcement officers, who are not bound by the same kinds of legal framework, and who have not studied the parameters of force that enforcement officers have to study, should not be given the leeway to exude the same level of force as these professionals. The proposition believes that this use of force by the average citizen should be criminalized and remain solely the responsibility of trained professionals. Civilians should alert law enforcement officers whenever it is they believe themselves, their possessions, or third party to be in danger. The proposition rests.
Proceed. Your 3 minutes starts now.
I would like to redefine the moot as this House intends to turn the use of strength or attributes of physical action as an act of violence, making it illegal, except when one quickly protects themselves in the force of Amendment 30 into a criminalized force. Honorable Chair, esteemed adjudicators, teammates, and opposition, a pleasant afternoon. Honorable Chair, esteemed Despite the views of the government, the opposition stands here today with the firm belief that criminalizing all use of force except self-defense is absurd. I'll define the following terms. Criminalize is the turn of action into a criminal offense by making it illegal. Force is the strength and attributes of physical action movements as an act of force in violence. Self-defense refers Self-defense refers to an individual acting quickly to protect themselves in the force of imminent threat from a reasonable fear of harm using a proportionate response. I'll be speaking on the response time of the police force in violent situations. I'll be stating my fellow teammates' points. The second speaker will elaborate on how the law being proposed oversimplifies the complexities of life and world situations, how self-defense is often subjective and ambiguous, making it difficult to determine definitely, restricting the use of force, undermine the principle of personal responsibility. Finally, our third speaker will be summarizing all our points. According to the Office of Justice, Program.com, several studies have established that if the police takes less than 5 minutes to respond to a call involving crime, the probability of making an arrest is 60%, and the time increases, the probability of arrest decreases, resulting in disputes escalating without the information of law enforcement. Opposition recommended.
Thank you very much, DeCartaret opposition. We'll run straight to the, thank you very much for that presentation. We will run straight to the proponent's second speaker, the Deputy Premier, St. Jago. It's your turn.
Our laws and how they are written discourage us from utilizing force, even if it stems from the intention of serving justice. The purpose of these laws is to promote non-violence and prevent vigilantism, ultimately fostering a safer and more harmonious society where conflict resolution is peaceful. The citizens of Jamaica are already so aggressive by nature. Entrusting the same amount of power as a law enforcement officer to untrained civilians to potentially de-escalate certain situations undermines the very foundation upon which our society rests. If anything, all that would do is add more fuel to the fire. Most times, our society operates on the principle of an eye for an eye, but an eye for an eye will ultimately make us blind. This statement is so powerful that just by hearing it, you are aware that no good whatsoever can come from it. It highlights the destructive nature of the perpetuation of a cycle of violence. Here's an idea of what happens when, in the least worst case scenario, where a citizen uses force. You may see a man mishandling a woman in public, and for good reason, you feel an urge to intervene by pulling him away from her. In doing so, the man takes offense, and the situation escalates to the point where he becomes violent. In this scenario, no threat to life is initially present. That only happens because the common citizen intervened in an inappropriate manner. In other words, the use of force created a threat to life. This is an existing sore foot in our society, which is why there is a strong campaign for conflict resolution programs as early as at the high school level. Criminalizing the use of force by civilians would make potential offenders realize the consequences of what taking matters into their own hands would bring, and ultimately dissuade them from doing so. Furthermore, this would uphold the maintenance of order in the country, as it would discourage vigilantism. By criminalizing use of force by civilians, we prioritize the well-being and security of both potential victims and potential offenders. If we are to maintain our stance on the principle of fairness and impartiality, we have to take into account that offenders too have a right to be treated fairly, and that no one is subjected to unnecessary harm or violence. Isn't that the foundation of a judicial system? Innocent until proven guilty? Personal nature of disagreements makes it likely that bias can cloud judgment. And as our first speaker clearly argued, in Jamaica, our citizens are prone to acting and reacting in the most violent possible manner. This is exactly why independent parties such as JPs, police officers, and courts exist, to preside over disagreements and conflicts as trained professionals who know how to mediate, diffuse the situation, and have the legal authority to pass judgments or order punishment. As things are now, though our laws discourage vigilantism and use of force by anyone, the problem is it still happens. The current frameworks do essentially merely discourage. What we need is something more forceful to drastically reduce incidences of people settling disputes or attempting to act as judges and police by forcing another person to do or not do what they demand. The nature of the impact is of such that the most forceful approach is necessary, and we are convinced that this is more than enough justification for the move to step up from discouragement to criminalization of acts of force except for self-defense, ultimately resulting in a downward trend of the country's violence, chaos, and injustice. Our goal should be to promote fairness and due process, not allow individuals to act as self-appointed, untrained arbitrators or police officers. Criminalization of civilians' use of force is the surest way to deter more people from becoming vigilantes and keep the duty to protect and serve the men and women trained in how to do it correctly. Thank you. The proposition momentarily.
We run to the opposition second speaker, the opposition deputy leader. Your time, your 3 minutes. The DeCartaret starts now.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the House, I stand before you as the second speaker in opposition to the motion to criminalize all use of force by civilians except in self-defense. While we acknowledge the noble intentions behind this proposal, we must carefully consider the potential drawbacks and unintended consequences that may arise. First and foremost, this motion oversimplifies the complexities of real-world situations. Life is unpredictable, and encounters may demand immediate action to prevent harm. By criminalizing all use of force, we risk leaving individuals defenseless in situations where they must act swiftly to protect themselves or others. Blanket prohibitions do not account for the nuanced nature of emergencies and the split-second decisions individuals may face. Moreover, self-defense is often subjective and may be challenging to determine definitively. The legal system is not flawless, and individuals may find themselves unfairly penalized for actions taken under duress. This motion may inadvertently lead to an unjust legal framework, discouraging citizens from taking necessary actions to protect themselves due to fear of legal repercussions. Furthermore, restricting the use of force may undermine the principle of personal responsibility. Individuals have a right to defend themselves and their loved ones. By criminalizing all use of force, we risk fostering a sense of helplessness and dependency on law enforcement, potentially overburdening an already strained system. In conclusion, while we all strive for a safer society, the motion to criminalize all use of force by civilians, except in self-defense, oversimplifies complex situations, risks unjust legal consequences, and undermines the principle of personal responsibility. Let us seek solutions that balance the need for public safety with the recognition of individual rights and the unpredictable nature of real-life scenarios. The opposition momentarily rests its case.
It's your turn, Proposition Whip. Your 4 minutes starts now.
So the first speaker would have stated that one of the justifications for transferring power from law enforcers to citizens is because of the response time of the police force. I'm asking you to expand because to us, the proposition, we believe this sole reason is not enough and is baseless. And that question is directed to the first speaker.
I was stating that in a situation, a violent situation where it takes 5 minutes for the police to respond, the law enforcement to respond, it's going to take time for the police to reach there, but in that time, this person wants to defend themselves because time is running out and the police force is taking a lot of minutes, right? And they're in the position where they have to defend themselves. So this would lead into violent force between both parties.
Continuing. So not every country have a perfect police force. Sure, you're going to have a small amount of cases where law enforcers are incompetent and have a late response, but to use that as a justification for transferring power to all citizens, majority of which are aggressive, contentious, and do not know how to handle cases civilly, whether lethal or non-lethal, which can lead to more wars, domestic disputes, and vigilantism, is utter nonsense. Your policy is going to cause more harm than good. The outcome in your case, there will be a greater probability of situations getting out of hand, while in our case, the probability will be less. Now, the second speaker would have said a statement that the citizens have a right to defend themselves. Might I remind you that the motion says that this House moves to criminalize all use of force except in self-defense. So that isn't included in the motion. And you also made a comment about the right to defend loved ones and others. Might I say that these matters are law and order, not a citizen's job. It is the police's job. In fact, Jamaica does not have a citizen's arrest order. It is not the right of a citizen to detain an individual because you are infringing on that person's right.
You made the point on what I said about protecting our loved ones. May I remind you that I said that life is unpredictable and we may be encountered with situations that our life is under immediate threat. Are you saying that if my life is under immediate threat, I am not allowed to defend myself? That is the definition of self-defense. And that's what I clearly stated in my speech. So I'm not understanding your question.
I think the St. Jago's whip is out of time, you can throw that question at her when it's your turn, DeCartaret. We thank you very much for that presentation, DeCartaret. Your whip, your 4 minutes starts now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to ask the second speaker of the proposition. Are you saying that as citizens, if we see a fellow woman being mishandled, we are to simply stand by and watch? it is our responsibility as citizens to help our neighbors and to improve the overall well-being of our society. If we are to simply rely on wait until law enforcement comes to the situation, by that time, who's to say that woman is not dead or is in definite harm?
All right, so just to respond to that question where you said about seeing a lady being mishandled, might I remind you, might I clarify that matters like these are law and order. It is not a citizen's job to employ use of force in these scenarios. In fact, it's illegal to intervene in these matters that warrant a law enforcer. It is a citizen's duty to report the matter. In fact, our laws are written in a way that discourages us from utilizing force, and this further reinforces what we said about utilizing force outside, except in criminal self-defense. Lord God. And all right, go on.
If it is wrong for citizens to act of their own will as they see that would benefit them, rather than waiting on law enforcement to every little situation.
Okay, I'll first like to say that the mood specifically says that it is accepting matters that include self-defense. What you're explaining to me is a matter of self-defense. And yes, it is wrong. Legally, it is wrong for a person, an average citizen, to use the same level of force as an enforcement officer in situations that involve self-defense. Rather than try to stir up another act of rage, call the law enforcement officer who is trained and is able to handle the situation properly without causing harm to anybody else.
Sorry, this brings us back to our point of the response time. If you're in a situation where you see it's applicable to show an act of force in order to de-escalate the situation, is the person not of their own right to prevent any escalation and bringing it to court?
Go ahead and answer. I got the general gist, and time is really against us. And it was our last question. I don't think she'd have had time for much more.
Answer that question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Even if in their world, it seems okay to apply the same level of force as an enforcement officer, it is highly probable in our world that applying that same level of force will cause more harm than good. And in response to the response time query, a visit from the Office of Utilities Regulations of Jamaica to the JCF already confirms that the response time of the JCF is one of the international's best. So if the response time is a concern, you should worry no more.
We thank the whips. Proposition summary, your time. Who is doing the summary? Your 2 minutes starts now, St. Jago.
I will be doing it. To begin, I will address the initial concern for the response time of the law enforcement officers. According to the Office of Utilities Regulations of Jamaica, upon visiting the JCF Emergency Communication Center, the call answer time of the JCF is considered to be within international best practices and standards. So if it is the response time you are worried about, worry no more. If you truly believe that you're in a dangerous situation and need to use force, call the trained professionals who are ready and able to help all who are in need. The second speaker of the opposition mentioned that the motion leaves people defenseless, but I would have you know that the motion says specifically that excludes the use of force in acts of self-defense. So essentially, the opposition has proven that there is no situation except self-defense where the average citizen would need to use force. The proposition again would like to make clear that the use of force is a legal term that refers to law enforcement officers using physically harmful or life-threatening actions to compel an individual or a group of individuals to cease a typically unlawful action. While the opposition may want to simplify the definition of force, the fact still exists that this is what it is legally defined as and what has set the foundation for this debate. Let us not attempt to water down the intensity of the use of the phrase use of force. Since as said by my second speaker, the average citizen of Jamaica is likely to be extreme in cases where the use of force may be necessary. To end, I will explain what self-defense is. Self-defense is using force or violence to protect oneself or a third party from imminent harm. According to Jamaican law, the victim should only use force when they reasonably believe that they are in immediate danger or imminent death, bodily injury, or serious bodily harm. We, the proposition, do not see an instance outside of self-defense where this need of force by a civilian would be necessary. But should there so happen to be such an instance where force is necessary, we believe that rather than using force, civilians should alert law enforcement officers where it is that they see it is necessary. The proposition rests.
Thank you very much, St. Jago. DeCartaret, your 2 minutes summary starts now.
Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. Our second speaker spoke to you about how restricting the use of force may undermine the principle of personal responsibility, leaving the victim or person at risk, helpless and defenseless. And in a threatening situation, were to call on law enforcement, this will cause an over-dependency on the law enforcement, or without self-responsibility, there will be a massive strain on our judicial system. Furthermore, as stated by a second speaker, the response time of police force or enforcement may vary, leaving the victim or person at threat in a difficult situation where they may be forced to defend themselves. She also stated that self-defense is subjective and may be challenging to determine definitely in courts. Life is full of unpredictable situations, and to try and meticulously manage everyone's use of force is completely unaccomplishable. Sorry.
I will hand over to the speaker, Ms. Philippa Davis, and she will announce the winner of the debate, the best speaker, and the best presenter. And then, of course, we will, if anything changes through the public voting process, you will know. But the announcement that is made here will be the announcement that stands for the results, unless in 24 hours there's something different in terms of scoring. Ms. Davis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Montague, and thank you to the ladies for their preparation and engagement and interest and effort shown today. I think you would also be doing some self-assessment to know your weak areas, but also your strong areas. Just want to remind you about the pronunciation of words. And I know there's a lot of information to share in a short period of time, but also to be clear about your speed so that the public and the judges can capture your various points being made. As Mr. Montague said, thinking on your feet, it doesn't come easy. It does require practice, but I do want to commend you for your efforts. So the tally of totals of points today for DeCartaret, 68.5 out of the 100, and for St. Jago, 74. And the best speaker is the opposition second speaker, that's Mauricia Jones. And the best presentation is the proponent premier, that's Liana Scott. And that would be the assessment for today's match. Thank you very much, ladies.